Hi guys, it's Marc Zicree, Mr. Sci-Fi, also known as Marc Zicree of Space Command. And happy 2018, by the way, if you're watching this soon after New Year's. If not, happy whatever you're in watching this. Um, Basically, we're going to be talking today about a movie that actually got very bad reviews, and on Rotten Tomatoes, it's got 51% from the critics and 25% from the audience. So Elaine and I wanted to go to a movie, and we thought, well, I like the idea of the movie, and well, sometimes you'll go with low expectations. You'll say, well, we'll just be in a dark room with popcorn, and hopefully it'll work out. And we really loved this film, and I wanted to talk about it because it wasn't at all what we expected. We thought it was a terrific film, and we wanted to recommend it to you, and so forth. Now, before I start, on my last Mr. Sci-Fi video, there were some people saying, well, what about all these books behind you? Books? What are books? What are books? Jesus Christ. They said, do you read those books, or just have them face out for the videos? No, I have thousands of books, of course. I'm a writer, and I'm a huge fan. Those who have been following Space Command know I'm a huge fan of 1950s science fiction novels, science fiction design. I grew up in the 60s and 70s reading the books that were written in the 50s. So this is some of my collection. I have a big collection of science fiction books, and I like to see. I love the cover art, and so particularly of the 1950s science fiction, and. So these are just kind of books that I have face out because I like to see them. I like the artwork, and I'll switch them out sometimes just so you guys can see some variants of what I've got. And of course, I'm a fan of science fiction movies and all of that. So there'll be stuff from 2001 or Day the Earth Stood Still, etc. But and the reason they're in plastic is because I live in Los Angeles. And what I discovered with books that are face out like this is if there's an earthquake and they're not in plastic, they fall and it breaks the spine, and that's pretty much the end of the book. Whereas if it's in plastic, it falls, doesn't break, and so that's the reason for the and it protects the books anyway. So, but on to Downsizing, directed and co-written by Alexander Payne, and it's a wonderful film. It stars Matt Damon and Christoph Waltz and Hong Chow. And the basic notion, you've probably all seen the trailers, it takes place in the near future where they can shrink people down to 5 inches. And if you're living a low-end life at full size, the money you have will stretch a lot longer when you're 5 inches, and you can live like a king. And so that's the basic notion. And I think the reason it hasn't done well, one reason, is because people went expecting a certain kind of movie. It was promoted sort of as a comedy, and I think people were expecting Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, something like that. And this is not what it is. It is very much a commentary on our culture of destroying the planet, our culture of consumerism, where we just don't care about what we're putting out into the world, and the fact that we may get to a point where we destroy the world and destroy ourselves as a species. And so, so let me talk for a moment about the whole history of films about little people, people who are shrunk down, miniaturization. Now, there were early films about this, even all the way back in the Silence. There were films dealing with different sizes, and in in the 30s, you had movies like Dr. Cyclops, which had someone who shrunk people down, and even in Bride of Frankenstein, Dr. Pretorius has miniature people he's created. But the first real iteration of the idea with any power was a book by Richard Matheson. Richard Matheson, of course, is the great writer of The Twilight Zone, and he wrote a book in the 50s called The Shrinking Man. Here it is, look at this, The Shrinking Man. And you can see it's got a little tiny guy fighting a spider. Now had it just been a novel, it would have come and gone, and really no one would have known it had existed, pretty much, because that's what happens with most books. But movies are a different thing entirely, and this book, The Shrinking Man, was bought and made into a movie that Matheson wrote. And of course, it being a movie, The Shrinking Man was too lame of a title, so they made it The Incredible Shrinking Man, and it was a hit. And it's a wonderful movie. I highly recommend it. You can definitely, I'm sure, go on Amazon and rent it for a few bucks and watch it. But it's really a fun film, and the effects of the guy shrinking are really, really fun, and the spider and all of that, and it's faithful to the book, and it worked. And so that notion permeated out into the world, and there were any number of iterations of this. There was also The Incredible Shrinking Woman, which was a comedy starring Lily Tomlin, and of course Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, which was a Rick Moranis film that did very, very well and was made into a few sequels. And so although the initial idea of a shrinking man was a serious idea, when it was made into different films, different kinds of films, it kind of leaned over into comedy because it lent itself so well to comedy. And in fact, in Disneyland, when I was a kid, there was the inner space ride, the wonderful inner space ride by Monsanto, where you get to shrink down and go into an atom. Great, great, great ride. I loved it. I wish it were still there. Paul Frees narrated it. It was terrific. So now let's get to downsizing. So, downsizing is about a guy who shrinks down to 5 inches, but it's not about what it's like to live at 5 inches for the most part. So in other words, he's not attacked by a house cat or a dragonfly carried off by bees. It's basically about the notion of what we do with our life and what brings our life meaning and how we find meaning in our lives and how we can be distracted by trivial things, but ultimately if we find a way to connect our heart and our compassion to the world, particularly the suffering of humanity, we can have a very meaningful and full life. So I'm not going to go into too much of the plot, but basically let me say that, though there may be some spoilers here, so again, I'll try to step a little lightly, but basically the notion is Matt Damon shrinks down, and through his journeys he finds a woman named, played by an Asian actress, a Vietnamese-American actress named Hong Chow, and she is from Vietnam. She was a political activist, and she now is a miniature person. And she, unlike many of the people that Matt Damon initially encounters, is helping others who are suffering. She is very dedicated to helping others, and through his relationship with her and his finding her, he finds himself and finds a purpose in life. And it's just great. It's just great. I mean, you may see it, you may not like it. Elaine and I were blown away by it. We thought it was wonderful. And Hong Chow is terrific. She's nominated for a Golden Globe, and deservedly. I hope she gets nominated for an Oscar. It's very interesting. She plays someone with a very thick accent. She does not have a thick accent if you see her interviewed. Very talented actress, incredible actress. But she's playing it with a very thick accent, and some people have criticized this, but I think they're totally misguided in that because in the earlier decades, and even now, a lot of actors of Indian extraction or Asian extraction, or other races, Latino, they choose not to play characters with accents because often that's been utilized to stereotype, particularly racist stereotypes of different characters, different people, different kinds of people. And so, for instance, George Takei very much regrets that he did 2 Jerry Lewis films in the early years of his career where he played a very stereotyped Asian character with a thick accent, and it was very embarrassing and very sad. And he wishes he hadn't done that. And but of course he went on to play Sulu, so the slate was wiped clean. He was one of the exemplars of great Asian characters. So, but Hong Chow plays a woman with a thick accent. Her parents are from Vietnam. They have thick accents, though she did not pattern that accent onto them, but on some other people she knows. But it's accurate, and it's not a stereotypical role. Is a fully rounded, full human being. She's wonderful. She's very strong-willed, and you get to see her heart. You get to see her history. You fall in love with her just as Matt Damon does. You fall in love with that character, and so I think it serves the best way of writing characters from around the world, because if you've traveled to other countries where they don't speak English, often and even here in America, because it's a wonderful land of immigrants, and I support immigration. I support people coming from everywhere. I love the fact that an American can be from anywhere. And if you hear growling in the background, that's my new puppies. We'll get into them in a Mr. Sci-Fi video very soon. Rudy and Eve, the Christmas puppies. We'll talk about that very soon. But okay, so downsizing. So in terms of someone with a foreign accent, there's a great moment when you're talking to someone who has a thick accent. Maybe their English is shaky, where you suddenly, where all that falls away and see who they really are, and you make a connection, and they become friends, and it's a great moment where all of a sudden you see past the difficulties of language, the difficulties of accent, and you see the common human heart. And this is exactly what happens in Downsizing, and it's very deliberate. Alexander Payne has always done character-driven films about Schmidt, Nebraska, etc. I found him an interesting filmmaker, and he's not one of my favorite filmmakers generally, but I always feel that he's following his heart, following his truth, and is a very talented man. But Downsizing, I think, is my favorite of his films because the notion is a science fiction notion. It's a very fun notion. It's a clever notion. and the idea of we have to find ways to not destroy our planet, or at least try to turn things around, is a very important message now, because so many people are working to destroy the planet actively, and we think we're invulnerable as a species. That is not the case. That is not the case. We're a very young species. We've only been around a few 100,000 years as Homo sapiens, and we've only had civilization, quote unquote, however you define it, for a few thousand years. So, and some people might even say we don't have it yet, but this is an important message, and it's about waking up to what the world is and what the suffering of the world is, and deciding to take a stand and do something on a very individual level, on a very personal level, one by one. And so I just thought it was great. I'm going to go see it again, I think. And the effects, the miniaturization, the visual effects of when Matt Damon gets shrunk down, and how that works, and the ins and outs of that. Very fun, very fun. And Christoph Waltz is really good, and Udo Kier is great. He's an actor that those of us who are aficionados would recognize. He was Andy Warhol's Dracula, for one thing, but he was also in Iron. Oh, what's it called? It's it'll come back to me. It's a great science fiction film where the Nazis are on the moon, and it's great. And there's a sequel to that coming out. But Udo Kier is in that, and he plays sort of a dissolute businessman in Downsizing, along with Christoph Waltz. Christoph Waltz is really great, and I think if you come to it without expecting it to be what the trailers would make you think it is, I think you'll really like it. So so that's sort of it for now. One last thing about Matt Damon, of course. Matt Damon has a lineage of science fiction, of really great science fiction films. So he's terrific, of course, in The Martian. He's great in Elysium. It's a flawed film, but he's terrific. And even in Interstellar, he has a fun turn. It's funny because if you want to have like quiz questions, like what actor played an astronaut marooned on an alien planet twice. That's Matt Damon, Interstellar and Martian. Two other quiz questions that are a lot of fun are what actor won 2 Oscars for Best Actor playing characters in the Civil War? That's, of course, Daniel Day-Lewis, because he was in Lincoln and also Gangs of New York, which was set during the Civil War. Another quiz question is which actor starred in the most Star Trek episodes, the original Star Trek, and that's, of course, Leonard Nimoy. He starred in one more than Shatner because he was in the original pilot that didn't have Shatner. So there you go. I've just gotten where you can win some bar bets. So that's it for now. Very soon we're going to be doing more Mr. Sci-Fi commentaries. So subscribe to Mr. Sci-Fi. Keep your eyes out for Space Command. If you want to keep pledging to Space Command, you can go on our Patreon page, or you can just go to spacecommandseries.com. And we're going to have a donate button. We just had our crowdfunding campaign. We're busy at work on post and doing visual effects, so watch this space. And so that's it for Mr. Sci-Fi. That's it for Marc Zicree of Space Command. We'll talk to you again real soon. Bye-bye.